Hello there YouTubers, subscribers and friends. Today we're going to discuss the question about what if Alaska still remained in the Russian Empire. Now, as you know, Alaska is part of the US, very much in the north. And it is rich in resources, a lot of petrol. And there also used to be a gold rush in 1898. All in all, it is a very important province or part in terms of economy. Now, many people know that Alaska is actually not very much populated. I mean, who wants to live in there? It's all the time cold, damn cold. And it is quite interesting to recall that Alaska was bought for very cheap price per square meter by the US from the Russian Empire. And at the time where the Russian Empire tried to sell Alaska to the US, it was actually in a very desperate state of financial crisis. The Russian Empire had a lot of problems and troubles in terms of money. But for this what if question, I suggest we will just say that they found another solution. Let's say that they would just cut their budget and also just tax heavily the population. Well, not really, because that would bring a very early Russian Revolution. But let's just say somehow magically, poof, all the problems were solved and Alaska would remain in Russian hands. Now, having Alaska in Russian hands would have very huge impact. At first, during the Russian Revolution, where the communists actually were trying to beat the White Army, I can see that for some reasons the White Army could retreat in Alaska and be heavily supported by the Brits and also maybe by the Americans, who could give supplies from Canada, of course, into Alaska. Alaska, of course, would not be English speaking, and Russian would be the dominant language. However, I can see that English would have some kind of specific status as trade language, as well as the native population would still have a very important impact. However, Russian would be, of course, dominant. Maybe not so much outside of Alaska, of course, but still within Alaska it would be Russian. Alaska would also be Christian Orthodox, and I wouldn't really see a huge immigration wave from all the European countries and also from the US and Canada. I would see more immigration waves coming from Russia, and especially after one specific event, the Russian Revolution. Now, I can see it's very likely that for some reasons, or strategic reasons, and also because, I mean, the sea is separating both places, mainland Russia and Alaska, the White Army would see they could not beat the communists. And in order to somehow survive, they would try to flee into Alaska. And now also during the events of the Russian Revolution, and also because of the temporary alliance between the Russian Empire and the US, the Tsar would probably try to flee into Alaska. Maybe not, but for the sake of the scenario, I would say he would just flee into Alaska and probably go to the best or the biggest city that you could have within Alaska, and also the one with a mild temperature compared to the rest of Alaska. Probably the communists, due to the closeness of Canada and the US, they would not be able to reverse the situation in Alaska, and we would have the same result as with today's Taiwan and China, where you would have, for instance, the new communist regime in mainland Russia and the remaining part of the Russian Empire in Alaska. So you would have two Russias, one that would actually become the Soviet Union, and the other part that would be the Russian Empire but within Alaska. There would be a huge impact in this kind of scenario, because first of all, the Soviet Union would focus more on Alaska as well. They would probably also use military power to reconquer Alaska. And due to this split between the USSR and Alaska, World War I as well as World War II could look much more different. But let's say, for the sake of the scenario, that somehow the USSR would just ignore Alaska and see it like as last thing or last interest they would have, because it would be just very, very late where people would discover that Alaska would be rich in petrol. And it would just be after the 50s, let's say, where all of a sudden petrol was found within the Russian Empire. Of course, meaning Alaska. Now, the Soviets, they would be really mad about it. But they couldn't do anything, because the US, they would have nuclear weapons, and them as well. So what they would try to do is, probably they would try to invest heavily and sponsor communist or extreme left opposition groups within Alaska, saying Russian Empire. Also, maybe they would have the same stance as today's China with Taiwan, saying that whoever would accept the Russian Empire as successor states would not have any diplomatic contact with the USSR. So, due to the pressure and also due to the immense size of the USSR, many countries, actually most of them, would then switch to recognize the USSR as successor of Russia, and they would delegitimize the Russian Empire within Alaska. Probably they would send like unofficial diplomats in there and saying like, yeah, that's, they still support them, but they would do it unofficially, of course. I could also see that Alaska would become some sort of Canadian and of course American puppet, but most likely an American one. Maybe before it would still be a British puppet. And also the Alaskan economy would have the same kind of boost as in OTL, and probably a much better economy, since there would be a capital region. And also because you would have a very, very good Tsar in there who would like to just spend money everywhere, and perhaps you would have a tiny boost in tourism. However, the population would be bigger, because many supporters of the White Army or the Imperial movement, they would move with the Emperor or the Tsar into Alaska, saying that many emigres of Russia during that time, who went mostly to France or the UK or even Germany, they would not go in there, but instead they would try to reach Alaska. Now, in such a world where you would have, during the Cold War, Alaska on the side of the US, and then the USSR, of course, claiming that Alaska is theirs, there would be more tensions, and also there would be a different missile crisis. So it would not be a missile crisis, let's say, on over Cuba, but the missile crisis would happen over Alaska, where the US would be nervous that the USSR would place a lot of rockets and a lot of their heavy armaments in close reach to the Russian Empire, but they would be unable to criticize it. Of course, they would try to, but they would be in a very unsupportive and unreliable position, since the very, very eastern part of Siberia is still part, actually, of the USSR. So, could you just say, oh, just remove your weapons and your armies from this place that actually belongs to you? No, of course not. I mean, the USSR would just say, go to hell to the USSR, to the US. And if everything should go all right, and if there would be no war, nothing changed in World War I, in World War II, in the Cold War, there would still be a very interesting situation. After the fall of communism, what would happen? Would the Tsar just go back and there would be a unification of the two Russias? Or would they actually sort out their differences, but still somehow see that they don't belong anymore to each other together? I could see both scenarios happening. So in one case, I would see that the Tsar would go back to Russia, but that many people would have a very bad opinion about him, because due to communism and all the other governments that came, they would see the Tsar as American infiltrator, and it would actually be true to some extent, because the Russian Tsar, who would be exiled in Alaska, would have a very good relation with the US, for a very good reason, because before, when you had the Cold War and also the World Wars, he would rely on the US, and also during the Civil War, the White Army relied as well on the support and the supply from the US as well as the UK, or Canada, let's say. And there could be also the other scenario where the Tsar would renounce on the all-Russian throne, and he would just continue to be on the throne of Russian Alaska. And there would also be probably debates about how they should call themselves, if they still want to be the legitimate successor of Russia, or if the ex-USSR would be the successor of Russia. So there would be a lot of talks, debates about it, and probably, and I think that's the most likely scenario, the Tsar would just say that he's okay being the Tsar of Alaska and just renounce on the all-Russian throne. But I could also see that there would be many political parties supporting a reunification, but it would just not be the same as with East and West Germany, because Russian Alaska independently would have a very good economy, and also they would have a lot of manpower in there, whereas the USSR, if it failed, and also for the sake of the scenario it would fail, they would have a very different stance towards the Alaska, because they were the one who actually had the problems in economy, in politics, and also the ones who actually at the end would fail. So, would you like to reunify with someone who failed, or would actually the one who failed prefer to reunify with the more successful part? And then again, you have different sizes between them. I mean, an independent Alaska, even if you would have the double of population, would still not come close to the power of Russia or the ex-USSR. So many ways to go there, no? A very interesting topic as well. And I actually choose that topic because I saw how many people discussed about what would the situation be like if Russia had not sold Alaska to the US, and what many say, yeah, you would have a missile crisis on Alaska and all of that. Well, it would be just partially true. It would be not on Alaska, but actually on eastern Siberia. And also a communist government holding power onto Alaska would just never happen. And also, if Canada or the US or the Brits would try to capture Alaska from the Russians, they would wage war and it would just end in a stalemate. So that's just not gonna happen. In that case, I think it's more likely again that Alaska and Russia for a certain period of time would go a separate way. But then again, there is the very high chance that they would reunify. And if not, they would have very close cultural, of course linguistic, as well as economic ties. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. I know it's a bit long, but feel free to make any comments about it. Feel free maybe to even correct me if you think that there is something I said wrong, but then again, it's alternate history. And if you have any other ideas, feel free to write them down. I'm Althistory Luxembourg, and I hope to see you on my next videos. Bye! Don't forget to subscribe, give a comment, give a like, and watch all the other videos that I have on my channel. Have a great day!